Hello everyone. Welcome to yet another talk by Design Hat. Today it's going to be surreal as we discover some of the best lessons in the design industry which will help you make a better UX designer. For the same we have with us Arko Sen, who's currently working as a tech lead uh, UX CoE at HCL Software. With over 10 plus years, Arco has some really interesting insights to share with us. Thank you so much, Arco, for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Siddhi.
Thank you. Yes. I'll start with the screen sharing and maybe you can start presenting now.
Absolutely. Yeah,
All
let's
right.
dive into it. So let's start from the first slide. Uh, right. So yeah, I call this lessons from the design industry because honestly, uh, there is a lot which is not always covered in your standard design course or what do you call it, or in your standard even your design degree, because they'll give you a lot of theoretical knowledge, and mind you, that is good theoretical knowledge. If anybody tells you a design degree is no use, that's wrong. But again, that's not the only path into the UX industry. We know a lot of UX people who have come from marketing. We know a lot who have come from development. But once they come into the design industry, there are lots of small tips and tricks and a lot of details you get to know once only you are in the job. So here I am sharing those with you. Moving on, let's talk about uh, who I am to share that with you. My name is Arko Sen. Of course, here it's very clear that I have very long hair. Apart from that, uh, I actually entered the design industry per se in 2003, and I'm not that old. I'm only 36. It's just that I started work very early. I started work right when I joined college. I was already freelancing. So from that time I've been doing graphic design, audio editing, video editing, this that, and soon after I joined companies. I did design, I did programming, and then I moved on to UX. From 2011 onwards I've been working purely in UX. So it's been a long career. And one of the main things I say that back in 2003, design meant that there's a client, there's a client or your customer or if you're in a job, there is your manager, and they give you some requirements and you design something. That was your job. But now, being a UX designer does not mean doing what your customer or your client asks you to design. Now it actually means doing what the users want, doing what the business and the users, where it comes to confluence, and that is what your client needs. So yeah, that's where we are going. And now let's go to the next slide and talk about the interesting question about what is the difference between an artist and designer. And I don't know if you're allowed to type your answers in the chat or not. If you are, then sure, give it a go. Give me some ideas on what do you think is the gap between an artist and a designer. Look, one of the main things, of course, both of them are very good in terms of visual aesthetics, in terms of understanding what is good design. Both an artist and a designer can tell you what is good design. So where is the difference? Let's Designer is user centric. That's nice. And artist is self expression. Actually, the latter one is actually closer to the mark. Designer, of course, not all designers are user centric. Even now we have a lot of designers who are still working just according to the thing. But yes, UX designers need to be user centric. That's one of the major things. But an artist is self expression. So if you go to the next slide, we'll see exactly that an artist is, they have an audience. They think of something, they have a certain goal, they have a vision, and they are bringing it out. And it can have many different influences. But designers have clients. They want a particular thing. The audience is waiting for whatever the artist will show. The audience will say it's good or it's bad, it's different. But clients want one particular thing, and the designer needs to deliver it. So, most designers are artists, but that does not mean that all artists will be designers. And I know a lot of designers, entry level designers, take pride on being themselves as good artists, and you should take that pride. It's a very important quality, but you should never forget the fact that when you are entering into the design world, you don't have an audience. You have clients who need a specific thing. Moving on to the next slide, we get to see uh, now anything you design must fulfill the needs of the client, whether you like it or not. This is another very interesting lesson. Many times the client says I want A, and you think that the good solution would be a beautiful solution that you would like would be B, but research tells that the ideal solution should be C. Then yes, neither you or nor the client are right, and you don't have to like the solution, but the right solution is what the research says, what the user wants, and of course which suits the needs of the client. Just remember, what the client wants may not exactly be what the client needs. It's up to the user experience practitioner to find that gap and research and find out what is it that the client needs. Many a times the client might not even know that a better solution exists. It's your job to bring that solution to forth and say that, look, it can be done like this. A very good example I always give is this list like thing that you see in the left, in the right. That's basically, if anybody is aware of this website, it's called Craigslist. It's very, very famous. It's very, very old, and it's a very, very successful design. But you show this to any designer, they'll tell you, what design is this? This is just text. It's just lists. It's horrible. But you know what? The users love it. They come, they see all the categories right at one glance. They know what they want. They're looking for the stuff that they need, and it's a super successful design. It lasted for 20 plus years in the internet. I mean, that's pretty much the age of the popular internet, and it's been there since that long, and it's working. So yes, design does not always mean that it's beautiful, you're going to love it, but it needs to work. Moving on, let's talk about three things to remember from the things I mentioned. And this is the starting of my lessons from the design industry. Lesson number one: beautiful is not always useful. Best case scenario is the solution is both beautiful and useful, and that is what you should always strive for. But ultimately, the user's requirement, the client's needs, the functionality, that comes first. Second is, think before you design. So honestly, this is not just what do you call it, advice I give to designers. I even give this advice to programmers. I give this advice to anybody who is trying to create a solution to a problem. Listen to the problem, start creating a solution. Bad. Stop doing that. Do not start thinking of the solution the moment you hear about the problem. It's a natural tendency, by the way. Like, oh, this is getting stuck. Try that. Wait. First, figure out why is it getting stuck? Is that the real problem at all? And what are the details of the problem? So definitely think about the problem. Again, you don't have to spend 5 years doing research, but if it's a 3-month project, then at least spend the first 2 weeks doing solid research, making sure that the next 2.5 months will not be spent in vain, creating something that nobody will use and nobody will like. So take time to understand the problem. The best solution can pop into your mind in 5 minutes, and that's true. But you need the next 5 hours or 5 days or even 5 weeks to verify that the first solution that popped into your mind in the 5 minutes was the best solution. And it's not just verifying for yourself. The client will also ask, you're making this design, you're saying this will work. How can you be sure? You need to show the data. You need to show the research. So always, the modern design philosophy is data-driven decisions. So you need to have the data so that you can substantiate your decisions. And finally, one of the major things about designers nowadays is design right now, particularly UX design, is a very communication heavy medium. It's a very communication heavy field. You need to be, I'm not saying you need to be an orator. I'm not saying you need to have flawless English skills, but you need to be able to communicate your thoughts. You need to be able to communicate your research. You need to be able to prove your design decisions to the clients. You need to be able to communicate it to the developers, and you need to be, if you're doing research, you need to be able to communicate with the users. So it it can make or break a design career. You can be a very powerful designer who is not a good communicator. You will see the better communicators keep going ahead of you, and you are sent to the backstage just to make the designs and never see the light of the day. So definitely focus on your communications. It's super important in the design industry right now. Moving on, the next slide will tell us, this is slightly controversial. A lot of people would say, look, focus on the design, the technology will follow, which is true at one end. I mean, you don't need to be a slave to the technology. You don't need to do what is the easiest for the developers. The developers will always tell you, oh, this is simpler for me. Can I do it this way? But if you know, if the better thing is to do it that way, then you have to force the developer that no, do it that way. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you have no knowledge of the technology, are you designing for web? Are you designing for mobile devices? Are you designing for smart televisions? Are you designing for VR glasses? In each case, you need to understand at least the basics of that technology, just wanted to understand what is possible and what is not possible. I mean, you're designing you're designing for VR glasses, and you design the small control panel with lots of buttons. And how are the VR users trying to, they're trying to move their heads through those buttons, and you're like, well, this design works perfectly well with a mouse. Well, those guys don't have a mouse. So it's to learn about the technology, to know how it works, to know what is feasible or not. If your particular browser can do 3D animation or not, you need to know that. And honestly, you don't need to be an expert in the technology. You need to communicate with your developers and ask them, hey, I'm thinking of this kind of a solution. Is it possible? So communication again becomes important here. Moving on to the next slide. Here is a very what do you call it? Extremely reductionist process or reductionist description of a product. A product needs three parts. There must be people who can imagine and design a thing, which will be your part. There must be people who can build it and make it a thing, make it a product, make it real. And next is somebody who can take it out in the market and sell it. Now, why do I even mention these three parts? It is that all these three people need to be in very strong communication with each other. If you are a designer, you need to talk to your marketing and sales people, because very often they are the people who are closest to your customer. And your builders, as in your developers, you need to be hand in hand with them, because you can design the best ABCD, and they can look at that and they can build a very awesome DEFGH, and the thing is basically what they call a hodgepodge. It will never work. So you have to keep your compatriots, which is the builders and the sellers, in mind while you design. Moving on. it's let's give you a quick example of what happens when you design without the technology, without the technical basis. So can somebody tell me what is wrong with this picture on your left? And by the way, I see somebody in the chat, Viraj says data-driven decision seems like data science. Data science is actually data science is quite close to UX, but both are very visual nowadays. But the ideal point is, yes, data science brings you the data and they let you make meaningful decisions out of it. And those decisions should feed your design ideas. So do I get any answers about what's wrong in the left-hand thing? I do get something. It's not made for all screens. Sure, it looks like a desktop solution, but even worse than that, look at the prompt, look at the field. It's a phone number field. Please enter your phone number. And it's 3 drop downs with numbers. You can't type in your numbers there. You have to select from a list of 1,000 numbers on the first item, 1,000 numbers on the second item, 10,000 numbers on the third item. Because somebody said, okay, these will be numeric fields, and that's it. They left it there. And so now you have a solution where it's nearly impossible to enter your phone number. So when you design something without the correct specifics, and the builder, as I said, you design ABCD, the builder builds EFGH, and what comes out is XYZ. And it's a recipe for epic fail. So it's very important to know what you're designing for. It's very important to communicate that to the developers once you hand off your design. Moving on. Again, I go with tips now. You are designers. You are not developers. You don't need to be able to sit down and code. By the way, if you are able, then great. Then you fill in that small gap of people who are called UX engineers, who understand both UX and UI design and can jump roles. But I'm not talking about that. Even if you are a pure UX designer, you still need to understand some basics of UI development and understand some basics of process modeling and complex flows. And for that, 3 technologies are very useful. One is HTML, because everything now is browser based. Even mobile apps have now become browser based. So HTML, and what goes hand in hand with that is CSS. The third thing that goes hand in hand with that is JavaScript. But honestly, that goes too much into programming. You don't have to understand JavaScript, but at least understand HTML and especially CSS, because 90% of the time you design a beautiful design and a developer will come to you and say, I can't make this. You have designed this, but I can't make this. You probably need to sit down with the CSS, sit with the developer and say, look, you add this style, and this style. See, this is how this is made. And that doesn't mean the developer is a bad developer. It's that the designer should know better about CSS than the developer. And that's very common. So you should know about HTML, CSS, and a knowledge of algorithms is very useful, because developers and software itself, they're logical things. You can make them beautiful, you can make them human, and to do that is your job. But the underlying thing, it will still use logic, and you need to understand those flows of logic. So you need to understand algorithms a bit. Again, I'm not saying you need to be masters of these 3 things, but you need to have the basic knowledge of these fields of technology. Moving on. Yeah, and now for those people who are actually interested in the engineering side of UI also, JavaScript is your bread and butter. SVGs are super important, because that's like the how to create things with code, how to create designs with code. Image compression is something in terms of technology that you need to understand, because a lot of time you can design a beautiful website with a beautiful image, and when it comes out into the browser, it's all blocky, or it takes 24 hours to load. So this is a good piece of technology to understand. Data visualization libraries, graphs, charts, as people said, data science. Um, okay, quick question. I'll take quick questions here. Okay, not made for better with type. Yes, yeah. That field would have been better with type, or number input fields which are open to type nowadays. We have them. That's definitely a bad user experience. Scope of UX engineers in the Indian ecosystem. Actually, UX engineers right now do fill in that unicorn space, particularly with startups who don't have the bandwidth to bring in one team of UX designers and one team of UI developers. So in that space, one UX engineer can fill in both roles. Of course, the higher you climb in any of the fields, you try to specialize in one way or the other. You try to either specialize in UI development or specialize in UX design. But if you start off as a UX engineer, you have both of the paths open, and uh, each time you go into one path, you still have good knowledge about the other paths. Like I started with both programming and design. I went into design, but I understand programming well enough that when developers come to me and say, "Oh, I can't do this," I can go and tell them, "No, you can do this, this, and this, and that will happen." So, and in the Indian ecosystem, come on, it's a country full of startups. Definitely, there's a lot of scope. What tech stacks have you learned during my 10 years of experience? Did it help me in getting a better job? Yes. So when I first got into UI, I learned JavaScript. I of course knew my HTML and CSS. I learned Flash. I learned uh, I knew the whole J2E tech stack, but that was programming. But in the UI thing, I learned jQuery was the king back 10 years ago, and after that there was Sencha, and now React and Angular. I don't know much about React and Angular, by the way, because by the time they came in strong, I had already moved into pure UX. But those definitely let me do better in the industry. Did they get me a good job? Sometimes. And I also freelanced for 5 years. We don't say freelance nowadays, we say consulted. I also consulted for 5 years, and they definitely allowed me to land better contracts. So yes. Finally, coming back to the topic, yes, the basics of React and Angular. Nowadays, if you are going into a bit of UI technologies, you should know the basics of React and Angular. And finally, if you know what WAI ARIA is, then my hats off to you, because accessibility is a major important thing. I will mention that later also. But for anybody working with HTML, the knowledge of why ARIA is crucial, very important. So moving on. Now, like previously when you said you need to be good communicators. So let's talk about communicating your design vision, because you can design the best experience. You can make beautiful mock-ups. You can make prototypes. You know what you want. And then there's this developer and or the client who comes in and says, I don't get it. This is bad. How does this even work? This is not good. I wanted what that guy is doing. These are things you will constantly uh, hear from clients and developers. And how to communicate what your vision is to both your clients and developers. Let's talk about it. Moving on to the next slide. Technique number one, and this is probably, if there is one thing that you need to take away from this whole talk, take this away. Do not send your designs. Because when a design is sent, whoever is seeing it without context. Sure, if you're doing user testing, then sending your designs and giving the user a task, that's the only situation where you need to send your designs. But in all other cases, when talking to clients, when talking to customers, managers, developers especially, sit there. If you can't sit beside the person, then like right now, go on a screen share, get on a call, and present your design. Present, walk through it, show them your vision, tell them how is it good for the user, tell them what research supports it, tell them how it exactly works. So it has to be done in person. And here in this case, in person means while you're communicating with them. Sending a mail, sending it, dropping it in a folder doesn't work. Don't try it. And they will have doubts when they're looking at the design. They'll have doubts, questions, and they'll be like, "Oh, this is probably not good." And you need to be there to answer those questions. You need to be there to assuage those doubts. So don't send present. Moving on. Technique number 2. Even today, UX has been here in the industry for almost 15 years now. Even today, 60 to 70% of managers and developers think that the job of a UX designer is to only produce screen mockups. This is wrong. Your job is not to only produce screen mockups. That's like the tip of the iceberg. That's like saying that you know that's literally like saying that oh, the job of a designer is to write the job of a developer is to write curly brackets. Or it's to say that the job of an architect is to draw lines using a ruler. There is so much thought, so much planning, so much research that goes behind that one screen mockup, and you need to show that work. It cannot happen inside your head. Otherwise, your developers, your clients, particularly your managers will say, doing this design mockup takes you 2 hours. Why are you taking 2 weeks of time? It's a valid question. And it's true, you cannot make that design before 2 weeks of time, because there is a lot of research, thinking, analytics, problem solving to do before you finally produce that design. And on your right hand side are a lot of different design deliverables. Remember this term. If you later need to know about it, Google it. It's called all the kinds of design deliverables. We have of course wireframes, prototypes. These are the common ones. These are the mockups. But you have flowcharts, you have what do you call it? Usability reports, you have style guides, you have journey maps, you have competitive analysis, you have conceptual models, business maps, you have heuristics reports, you have personas are super important. Sometimes you have like ultra low fidelity paper prototypes, rough sketches, so many different things to show your work, to show the flow. So you need to be able to do all of these, and you need to be able to show it to your managers, to your customers, to your clients, to tell them that, look, I know the mockup, I did the mockup in 2 hours, but this is the 5 weeks of research and the 5 weeks of thinking that I put into it. These are the deliverables. And the deliverables also help them understand your reasoning better. So moving on. Technique number 3 is documentation. Your design, if what you are sending your developers is just the if it's just the design, if it's just the mock-up, then you have already failed. You have failed, because again, you have sent them ABCD, they will produce an EFGH, and they will not understand any bit. You have to send technical specifications, you have to send notes, lots of annotations. Like on the right side is a good example where where you have added text, you have added alt text, where you have sent that, okay, in this case, if the user has this privileges, this will come. If the user has that kind of an admin account, then this will come. In this case, in dark mode, this color changes to that. All of this information needs to be sent alongside your design, and these need to be clearly documented. I know you will present it and you will speak all of that, but it still needs to be a clear document, so that later on, when you're not there to reiterate that, your developers can check that document and create it. And at the end of the day, once they have developed, and then the manager comes to you and says, oh my God, We thought we were developing an ABCD. Why have they created an EFGH? Designer, you must have not given them the right thing. Then you can also show, no, here, look at the documentation. I did give them the right thing. If they have done an EFGH, it's not my fault. So it documentation is good for communication, it's good for hindsight, and it covers your behind if there is a problem. So definitely document. Next is top design deliverables. The whole list of design deliverables I mentioned, uh, three of them are super important and very useful. First is design specs, pixel measurements, color values, design tokens, different alt texts, different values of different icons if different kind of users are there. All these details go into design specifications, and they are usually sent as a set of annotations. And with modern tools, you can the design specifications automatic. If you're using Sketch, Figma, XD, you will basically be able to add those specs right into the design, and the developers can see the inspect mode and see it. Style guide is particularly when the design specs, when you have a lot of screens and you are creating some very common basic rules for the colors, for the drop shadows, for the this, for the that, for the fonts. In that case, you can create a style guide. Style guide helps both the developers, it also helps the next designers who touch your work. I mean, you do your work today and then you leave, or you have moved on to a new project and your junior has taken it up. They need to understand what you did. So you need to provide a style guide for them. So it's good for posterity. Uh, Next is, give me one moment. I think I just, right, sorry. Um, Next is flowcharts. Flowcharts are basically best used for information architecture. They're also good for user flows, and it is very useful to capture the different touch points, the different paths the user follows when interacting with your this thing. They're also good to track the flow of data through the pages. So flowcharts are sort of important, and they also help. Again, they help the client. As in, whenever I say client, imagine I'm also talking about your manager, and they also help the developers. These three design deliverables are very important. Next, let's go rapid fire now. Uh, 10 tips that they will never teach you in design school. If they teach you, then they're a very good design school, but I still have not seen these taught in design schools. And yeah, this title is super clickbait. But yes, first is accessibility. Accessibility is super important. And wait one moment, I have to send this call. Just give me a moment. Take this. Right. Thank you so much. Um, Accessibility. Accessibility is getting more and more important over the years. Uh, Accessibility is, of course, about universal access, so that everybody, all of your audience can see, can access your features, can access your products. And when we say all of you users, we mean inclusivity in terms of everything, but mostly uh, differently abled people, disabled people, and also people under temporary disabled circumstances. And it's getting super important. It's going to become more. It's part of the law now in a lot of countries. In US, it's a law. In lots of the European countries, it's the law that your product needs to be accessible. So people who can't use a mouse, who are only using a keyboard, can see it. People who can't see the screen well, who are only using a screen reader, they can access your product. People, people whose mouse is broken and people whose monitor is not working well are under the same problems. If your product can help them, all the more better. Forget screen is broken. How many times have you opened an app right under sunlight and you can't read anything? That's because of bad color contrast. If it were a more accessible page, then you could have read it. So it's important. It's important for it's crucial for the disabled people, but it is helpful to everybody. Super important. Tip number one, remember it. Next, design systems. It can reduce half of your work. They are basically like the alphabet of your this thing. You don't have to worry about the micro interactions. You don't have to worry about whether the developer will be able to develop this exact thing or not. Design systems come with a pre-designed, pre-developed set of components which you can use, and they're just like Lego blocks for design, and they're super useful nowadays. They're very popular ones. Google's Material is one of the most popular ones. Adobe Spectrum is new. IBM Carbon, Microsoft Fluent. Most of these are open source, and you can use them, and they're very, very powerful. They can, as I said, they can reduce half of your work, and they also bring consistency to your design. So definitely use them. Tip number three, typography. And the picture says everything. Bad typography is everywhere. Good typography is invisible. When you see typography done right, it's like special effects in cinema. If you come out of a movie and you say, oh my God, they had such great VFX, that means the movie did not do well. Because the visual effects should be such an integral part of the story that you should not be separately noticing them. Good typography should be an integral part of your story. If people are saying, oh my God, I love the font, then either they're a designer. If they're a common user, then you're going too fancy on the fonts. The font should be invisible. People should read it, be able to read it perfectly, clearly, and move on. It should serve its purpose. It should be good typography. Sure, if they like how the text is everywhere, that's great. And typography is a huge, huge subject. Leading, kerning, this, that, serif, sans serif, blah, blah. Learn a bit about it, learn a bit about the basics. It'll help you in the long run. And a good tip I give, just once go into the previous place. The only place to use a fancy font is on the brand graphic. Do not use fancy fonts in your UI. It might look cool for the first time users, but if you want your users to use it more than one time, then please don't use a fancy font. Moving on. We have design tokens. This is again new technology. This has gotten popular over the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm partial to it. I'm even part of the W3C's design token work group. It is basically creating variables for the smallest design bits. It's like the atoms of your design. The colors, mm, uh, the spacings, the details of typography, the font size, uh, the, the the radius of the rounded corners. All of this. And if it's a piece of data that is used in more than one place, then you could probably have a design token for it. And if you have and use the design tokens consistently, however big a product you have, it will always look uniform and consistent. Design tokens are slightly more technical, but you should learn how to use them, even if you don't know how to create them. So with most design systems come their own set of design tokens. Learn how to use them. Learn how to use them outside of the design systems. This is a more in-depth topic. I recommend you learn about it. But this is, again, getting more important over the course, and this will be standard practice in a very, it's already standard practice for all big firms. It will become standard practice in small to medium businesses also. Moving on. We have personas. I have already mentioned personas twice throughout this whole thing, and it is super, super important. Personas are basically an abstract representation of your user. Personas create a create empathy. It's not for you, because you as the designer, you should have empathy of your users without using personas. You should be drowning in empathy for your users. But how can you transmit some of that empathy to your client, to your developers? You know how the user feels. How will your client understand? How will your manager understand how the user feels? So there, if you create a fictitious character, give them a name, give them some traits, give them some behavioral aspects, and then say, now imagine this person, imagine Nikki Parker, and imagine that they are trying to withdraw money using your app. And imagine Nikki does not have time to fill in these 5 details. Can you give Nikki the money with less while she fills in less details? Because she is going to enter the train, the mobile app will cut off from the network, and what will happen then? When you create those scenarios using people, even if they're imaginary people, make them sound real enough, then your audience, in this case your clients, managers, and developers, they'll understand why should you not try to take why should you not make the comment part of the transaction mandatory. That's fine. If they need to withdraw money, they don't have to enter a comment every time. So that decision, you need to substantiate it. Personas are very useful for that. You should have one persona for every kind of user you have, and you should use them. Most of the companies nowadays, they create personas and then they keep it. The point is to bring them repeatedly back into the conversation. Each time you have a design choice, you tell them, I'm doing this for Nikki, I'm doing this for Bob, I'm doing this for Sarita, I'm doing this for Mandu, and I'm saying that they would have a problem if I did not do this. Because they work from the office, they use their mobiles, because they are old, because because they use glasses, and all of those reasons, so on and so forth. So persona is super important. Next is minimalism. Minimalism is very, very important, and I will give you a priority list, basically in descending order of importance. First priority of anything you design is simplicity. The moment it starts becoming slightly complex, you will start losing users, you'll start losing customers. It needs to be as simple as possible. Of course, that does not mean that you lose out on priority number 2, functionality, which means it needs to be as simple as possible, but it needs to provide access to all the functions that you need to do with that. And of course, the example I give you is the Apple remote. 1 click wheel, 2 buttons, that's it. But you have access to all the functions just using that. And priority number 3 is, after doing these 2, if you can make it look good, do it. Because honestly, users like good looking things. I mean, that's why Apple sells, okay? So definitely, simplicity is the first priority. Don't make it complicated and good looking. Don't make it simple and good looking but not functional. Or definitely don't make it simple and functional but bad looking. At the end of the day, even if you do simple and functional but bad looking, it will still run. People will still use it. But don't drop on the first 2 priorities. Moving on. So there is UX design. Everybody talks about it. And 90% of the time, I'm very sad to say this, 90% of the time, people forget the U of UX. It's user experience design, not client experience design, not manager experience design, not developer experience design. It's not even designer experience design. You have to connect with your users. You have to figure out what they need. You are not the user. Your manager is not the user. Your stakeholders are not the users. Your company's director, even if they have a very strong voice, they're also not the user. Your users are your users. People who match your personas, They are your users. You need to go out, connect with them. If required, get budget, get permit, get all of that, but connect with your users. It's going to be a hard journey, but it is important. Because until you get verification, until you get the research done, even your best idea is just a wild guess. So even if you're working on a new product which does not have existing users, create the personas and find sample users according to those personas, interview them, get in touch with them. There are User research is a huge subject, but at least the first part of that is get in touch with your users, understand them. Moving on, connect with developers. Of course, you are connected superbly with your users and you understand that the users need ABCD, and everybody understands that the users need ABCD, and you give ABCD to your developers. And as I keep saying, what do they develop? EFGH. So you need to connect with your developers also. And all this connection, all these things, it brings me back to that one point. UX designers need to be good in communication. You need to be able to talk, you need to be able to express your ideas, you need to be able to gather data and communicate. So your job is not over once you hand over the designs. You need to be in constant touch with your developers to make sure that they are developing what you designed and not something else. Moving on. Number 9 is this is probably one tip that your design school will teach, but you will write in the exams and then you will forget it. Please don't forget it. These are important. These should be part of your design DNA. You don't need to remember them every time. You don't need to make a design and say, I will use the Zeigarnik effect or I will use Fitts law in this design. You don't need to treat it like that, but you need to understand this design. It needs to be part of your internal understanding of design, and your design naturally should follow the laws of UX. Uh, what are the laws of UX? You tell me. There are a bunch of them. Many different websites nowadays. A most popular website is called Laws of UX. There's a book called Laws of UX. Go ahead, look it up. Very good advice. Things that parts of the laws of UX, Gestalt principles. These should be the basics, the foundations of your design skills. Finally, on the last bit, be inclusive. This is new. This is a lot of people did not consider this as a thing even 5 years ago. But you need to be mindful of race, gender, sexuality, disabilities, ethnicity, geography, language, design for all cultures, design for different abilities, be gender neutral. I mean, even nowadays, I cringe. I cringe when UX designers are like, so when then the user comes and then he says, I mean, really? The user has to be a he? Really? I get mad. Don't get me started on this. But people have this natural tendency. And of course, 3,000 years of patriarchy. And I won't let my inner feminist out here, but be inclusive. Be inclusive in your work, be inclusive in your this thing. If you're designing a drop down for gender, at least do a male, female, other. At least. So, and of course, languages, different languages. If you're designing a global product, you can't design it just for English. I mean, your client could, your user could speak in Chinese for all we care, or they could speak in Hindi. We don't know. So you need to make sure that your interface also works with multiple languages. And another pet peeve, don't use white people stock images. If you're designing a product for India, don't call your persona Nikki Parker. So yeah, if you're designing for a particular geography, use the images of people from that geography. And yeah, I already said the last one. Stop saying he when you refer to users, or anybody for that matter. You don't know their gender. Just say they. It's a good gender neutral pronoun. Okay, that's it for today. I'm open to questions now. Let me look at the chat. Um,
Thank you so much, Arko. I think that was a brilliant session right there. There were really some very new lessons for myself, and
Mhm.
I'm sure the audience got to learn a lot too. Like you said, we'll be moving on to questions. You've already taken a few of them.
Sound.
So
Yeah.
we'll
Shall I start from the next ones?
yes.
Mansuk asks, I'm a React developer turning to be a UX designer. Should I add that developer aspect in my case studies? Definitely, you should. It's an asset. But do remember, just because you are a developer turned a designer, don't make it. Don't design things that are most easy to develop. If a better functionality can be achieved by slightly tricky development, go for it. Okay. Uh, Viraj asks, which duety did I mention? I have no idea what do you mean. Viraj, can you clarify?
Yeah, that
And
would be good.
while you clarify, I will go to the next one. Sahib asks, it's interesting how you are mentioning about data science knowledge along with some understanding of algorithms. Yes, all these topics are related. And look, you don't designers, you've heard of T-shaped people, right? T-shaped people is your superficial knowledge should be in all subjects. You should know a bit about everything, and then you should know a lot about your topic, which is design. You should know a lot about design, but should know a bit about data science. You should know a bit about development. You should know a bit about statistics. You should know a bit about marketing, research, sales. UX designers are cross-disciplinary people. Uh, Sahib also asked, what is competitive analysis doing here? Shouldn't it be a product manager part, you believe? Actually, no. Competitive analysis is one of the user research methods. So definitely. Now, the competitive analysis that the product manager does, the competitive analysis that the marketing people do, and the competitive analysis that you do would be slightly different because the product manager is doing competitive analysis with the product in mind. The marketing people are doing competitive analysis with their marketing campaigns in mind. You are doing competitive analysis with the user features and basically the user feedback in mind. Um, Knock Knock asks, how can we get better at documenting our design guides for developers the way you mentioned it? Try to keep it all in one place. If you're using Figma, XD, or Sketch, comments. They allow for comments. Put all of your thoughts and design things in the comments. Keep it in one place. Teach your developers to look at the comments. Ask them that whenever you guys are stuck somewhere, drop me a comment through the design so that all those design decisions will be stuck inside that one design area. And uh, there are other different methods for good design documentations. Uh, Please go ahead, read up. But I would definitely say design tool comments, number one priority. Uh, Design tokens you did not know about before. Is it not used by the majority? It's new. It's been only 5 6 years that it's been popular. It's still only used mostly by the big corporations because they have lots and lots and lots of hundreds of pages of design where they need consistency throughout. Their design tokens are important, and they're slowly coming into things. Once you start googling, you'll see the knowledge has already spread, but it's still yet to go fully mainstream, as in fully reach the small to medium business area. Uh, so yeah, it's used by a very, very important minority right now, but it's definitely spreading towards majority. Satwa asks, you're asking us to focus more on simplicity and functionality, and lastly on aesthetics. Does that actually work? It does actually work. I'm not asking you to drop any of those three, but I'm definitely saying simple, functional, beautiful. That should be the order of your focus. If trying to beautify it, you're getting if you're making it more complex, if you're losing out on simplicity and trying to beautify it, try to beautify it while keeping it simple. If you're losing out on functionality while trying to beautify it, put the functionality first. So it's just the order of things, but all three are important. It's like food, water, air. I mean, sure, without air you would die in 10 seconds. Without water you will die in 10, maybe 10 hours, and without food, you'll die in 10 days. But you'll die nonetheless. So you need to have all three, but which one is more important right now? So first thing is simplicity, second is functionality, third is aesthetics. Um, Join us on Discord. Yes. Hicks law. Yeah, good one. Uh, Difference between inclusivity and accessibility. Accessibility is part of inclusivity. Accessibility is a small part of inclusivity, but accessibility is also important because research shows that 15% of the global population, 15%, not a matter of joke, 15%, which is something like almost 1 in 6 persons, is falls into some disability criteria or the other, either motor issues, uh, or temporary disabilities, or this and that. So it's a very, very important part of inclusivity. And accessibility is older than inclusivity. Inclusivity is a bit more modern. It's a bit more woke thing, but it's also, as people develop for more cultures, as we are getting more global, we understand that there are many, many, many more different kinds of people than just who we see in front of us. So we should design for all of them. Um, jQuery, jQuery, JQuery. This is old school. This thing. Uh, Name of the book. Laws of UX. Don't buy the book. Just go to the website. It's the same content. But sure, if you love it so much that if you want to support the people of the website, support the creators, and if you like to have it in your bookshelf, if you like the feel of books, if you're a book person, sure, buy the book. But otherwise, just go to the website. Design principles, laws of UX, design principles. Yes, same things, different words.
I think we end the questions here.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. I think you were very prompt and very quick, brief, yet you covered everything. That was really interesting to see. We'll be just taking any last questions you guys might have. I have one question, and if we get another by that time, we'll take those up.
Yes.
So I really want you to, we talked about all the lessons, but which is that one lesson you would actually want everyone?
Communicate, communicate, communicate. I'll say it once, I'll say it twice, I'll say it thrice.
Right.
You are a
I
very good
agree.
designer, but you need to explain.
Communication is important with your users. Communication is important with the collaborators you're working with. Communication is important with the team members you're working with, and it should be everywhere. It should be just in your blood. That is nice. I think no questions so far. So
And
thank you so much,
honestly, 10
Arko.
years ago, a designer could do without communication. Their boss would give them the design brief. They would give the design back to the boss. The boss will say, well done. Or the boss will say, no, not done. Do this instead. And that would
Hmm.
be the job of a designer. That's not the case
Yeah,
anymore. So it is
true.
important now.
That is nice, right? Thank you so much, Arko, for coming here and having and blowing our minds with the awesome lessons. Like you said, there were some parts like tokens and the knowledge we should have, which even I was unaware about.
Mhm.
So it was a really informative session for me as well. Thank you, audience, for being very engaging throughout and throwing in your good questions. Julian wants you to write something down. What that might
Let's
be?
see. And please write what down. Can we get a clarification?
Laws of
Oh, laws of
UX.
physics. Sure, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you can
Yes.
you can probably share the link to the deck if people want to access it. You know,
Yes. Give me one
and
minute.
yeah, you can you can definitely have a look through it. So yeah, that's it, I guess.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow and reach out to Arko using the link in the description below. We'll be reaching out to you in the next session. See you soon, guys. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Is this the right link that I shared with you? Can you just see?
No, that's the laws of UX. I said the deck to the presentation if anybody wants to see.
Oh, all right. Great.
Yeah.
Sure. I will. Thank you so much.
All right. Catch you later. Nice talking to you guys. Bye bye.